The prairie that night stretched endless beneath a silver moon, a place where the whispers of grass told secrets older than men, and the stars seemed to lean low as if curious about what unfolded on earth. Somewhere beyond the horizon coyotes called, their cries riding the cold wind, and among the dark waves of tall buffalo grass a sound broke through, the muffled sobs of two young girls bound with rawhide, their small forms trembling as warriors from a rival band dragged them eastward toward the river's bend, where a makeshift campfire burned low, casting shadows that danced like sinister spirits. These were the daughters of a proud Comanche chief, their braids streaked with beads that glistened faintly in the firelight. But tonight they were captives, stolen in a raid meant to shame their father and break his power among the plains people. And though they fought bravely, biting and clawing, the men were too many, their laughter cruel, their promises darker still, for by dawn the girls would be carried farther south, bartered or worse, their fate sealed in silence unless some miracle intervened. And it was in that hour, when the night seemed to belong only to the wolves and the wicked, that the sound of hooves thundered faintly at first, then closer, a rhythm that shook the ground like drums of war. And out of the shadowed horizon rose a figure so immense, so unreal, that the warriors paused mid-laughter to clutch their weapons tighter, their eyes narrowing against the moonlight. For what they saw was a cowboy taller than any man they had ever known, his shoulders broad as an oak trunk, his hat casting a shadow that seemed to cover half the plain, his horse black as coal with eyes that glowed like embers, and across his back he carried a rifle longer than a spear, while at his hip swung a pistol that gleamed as though it had tasted lightning itself. Some whispered later that he was no ordinary man at all, but a spirit sent from the mountains, a ghost of some forgotten legend. Yet in that moment he was flesh and blood, and he rode without hesitation straight into the firelight, reins tight, voice booming like thunder. "Turn them loose, now!" The warriors jeered at first, for they were many and he but one, yet the fire cracked in such a way that shadows made him seem even larger, as if the earth itself had grown a protector for the children. And when he dismounted, the ground seemed to quake, his boots sinking deep in the dirt, his eyes hard beneath the brim of his hat. One of the braver men spat and lunged with a knife, but faster than the eye could follow, the giant cowboy's hand moved, his revolver flashing once, and the knife clattered harmlessly to the ground as the warrior stumbled back with a hand seared from the shot. That had split the blade clean in two. Silence fell then, broken only by the crackle of fire and the ragged breathing of frightened men, until the cowboy's voice cut again, low and steady. "I won't ask again. Release them." Fear spread like wildfire, for though they had numbers, none wished to test the speed of a man who could shoot steel apart in the blink of an eye. And so slowly, muttering curses, they untied the girls, shoving them forward, and the moment their bonds fell away, the giant knelt down, his massive frame gentling as he spoke softly. "You're safe now, little ones. Safe as long as I'm here." He lifted them with hands strong yet careful, setting them atop his towering horse, as though placing precious treasures beyond the reach of thieves. And as the girls clung to one another with tears streaming down their faces, the men around the fire grew restless, whispering among themselves of spirits, curses and battles not worth fighting. But pride is a heavy burden, and one warrior, ashamed to have been humbled, raised his bow, drawing the string tight with an arrow aimed straight for the giant's back. Yet before the weapon could sing its deadly song, the cowboy turned, eyes flashing, and his rifle rose with impossible swiftness. One crack split the night. The arrow snapped mid-air, its broken shaft scattering like straw, and the bow itself fell in splinters to the dirt. That was enough. The raiders broke, scattering into the grass like frightened jackals, leaving their fire to die cold as they fled into darkness, none daring to look back at the lone figure who stood like a mountain, guarding two trembling daughters of a chief. The cowboy mounted again, his enormous frame rising high in the saddle, and without a word he turned his horse westward, toward the Comanche camp miles away, the children safe in his arms. And though he spoke little on that long ride, The girls never forgot the warmth of his coat shielding them from the night wind, nor the steady heartbeat of a man who seemed more legend than mortal. By the time the first light touched the horizon, painting the plains in gold, he had delivered them to the edge of their people's camp, where watchmen gasped in disbelief at the sight of the chief's daughters alive, unharmed, guarded by a cowboy whose head nearly touched the boughs of the cottonwood tree beneath which he stopped, and without waiting for thanks, he tipped his hat, his shadow stretching long in the dawn, and turned his horse away, disappearing into the rising sun like a phantom of the frontier. But the story of that night traveled faster than wind, and before noon every tongue in camp whispered of the giant cowboy who saved the daughters of their chief, a tale destined to live longer than fire in memory, and though none yet knew it, the next day would bring something stranger still, for the father who returned bore not only gratitude but a reward unlike anything the plains had ever seen. Dawn was still clinging to the ridges of the plains. When the news reached him, the chief had returned. Word traveled fast, carried from rider to rider, passed like fire through dry grass, until even the furthest scouts knew that the old war leader had come back to his people, a storm in his eyes and a weight in his heart. For though his daughters had been saved by the hands of a stranger, his pride wrestled with the truth that he himself had not been there when they needed him. He rode in silence at first, surrounded by his warriors, his braids streaked with grey, his face carved by years of battles, his gaze locked on the horizon, where the campfires of his people smouldered in morning haze. When at last he reached the village, his daughters rushed into his arms, their tears wetting the front of his deerskin tunic, and for a long time no one spoke, only the sound of weeping and relief filling the air. The giant cowboy stood at a distance, his broad form still as stone, his hat lowered, not seeking thanks, not asking for recognition. He had done what needed to be done, and in his heart, that was enough. But the chief was not a man to let a debt linger like an open wound. He released his daughters, kissed their foreheads, and then turned his eyes to the cowboy. His gaze was sharp, measuring, almost suspicious at first, for he had seen many men on the plains, traders with smooth tongues, soldiers with cruel orders, outlaws with hollow smiles, but never one like this, never one whose shadow loomed like a living mountain, whose silence carried more weight than the boasts of 100 warriors. He walked forward slowly, the village hushed behind him, every ear listening, every eye fixed on the meeting of two men, so different yet bound, now by a single night of destiny. "You have done what no man of my blood could," the chief said, his voice rough as gravel yet steady. "You have given me back my daughters. You have given me back my heart. And for this, stranger, you must be rewarded." The cowboy raised his head slightly, his eyes catching the light of the morning sun, and for the first time he spoke more than a few words, his voice deep but gentle. "I don't need reward. I just couldn't stand by and let evil win." A murmur rippled through the Comanche, for though many distrusted men of the West, there was something undeniable in the way he spoke, something that seemed carved from truth itself. But the chief lifted a hand, silencing all whispers, and shook his head. "A gift refused brings imbalance. The world itself must be set right. You will take what I offer, not because you desire it, but because it is fated." He gestured then, and from among his warriors 2 men stepped forward, carrying between them a bundle wrapped in buffalo hide, tied with sinew and painted, with markings that glowed faintly as if the morning sun could not help but touch them with a secret light. They placed the bundle before the cowboy, and when the hide was unwrapped, what lay inside was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was not gold, nor silver, nor even a weapon forged by human hands. It was an object older than any frontier tale, a relic shaped like a small stone box, covered in carvings that twisted and shimmered when the eye lingered too long. The air around it felt charged, like the moment before lightning split the sky, and even the warriors stepped back uneasily as it was revealed. The chief looked at the cowboy, his eyes narrowing, and he said, "This is not of our people nor of yours. It was given to my father by a wanderer who came from the mountains long before I was born. He told us it was meant for the one who would save my bloodline. In a night of fire and shadow, it was never meant for me nor for my children. It was meant for you." The cowboy stared at the object, his jaw tightening. He had faced raiders, storms, and beasts of the plains, but never had he felt a weight like this pressing against his spirit, as though the box itself were alive, aware, watching him. He wanted to turn away, to refuse again, but the eyes of the entire camp were upon him. And more than that, something in the beating of his own heart seemed to answer the strange hum that now whispered in the air. He reached out, his massive hand trembling slightly, and when his fingers touched the box, the carvings flared with light, a glow that spread outward, painting the grass, the teepees, the faces of every man and woman in shimmering patterns of gold. Gasps erupted, children hid behind their mothers, warriors reached for their weapons. But the chief only stood firm, watching as destiny unfolded. The box opened by itself, its lid lifting without human touch, and from within rose a sound like wind through canyon walls. A low moan that grew into a voice none could understand, yet all could feel. Inside was no treasure, no jewel, but a fragment of something that looked like bone and crystal fused together, pulsing with a faint heartbeat of light. The cowboy staggered back, his hat slipping from his head, his eyes wide. For in that instant, images flooded his mind, visions of the land before men walked it, of giants who roamed the earth, of wars fought in the skies above the plains, of fire that fell from the heavens and carved mountains from flat earth. He saw battles that had no beginning and no end, and he saw himself standing in the midst of them, a lone figure holding back the dark. He gasped, clutching his chest, and for the first time since any man had seen him, the giant cowboy seemed afraid. The chief's voice broke through the storm in his head. "This is the strange reward, stranger. This is your burden and your gift. You are not just a man who rides the plains. You are something more. You are the one this land has waited for." The cowboy dropped to one knee, not from respect, but from the sheer weight of what coursed through his veins. And the people watched in awe as the light of the relic bled into him, veins glowing faintly, beneath his skin like rivers of fire. He could feel power stirring in his bones, but with it came a terrible sorrow, a sense that his life would never again be his own. He wanted to speak, to ask what this meant. But words failed him, and only the wind carried his ragged breath. The chief placed a hand on his shoulder, firm, grounding him. "You saved my daughters," he said. "Now this land will call upon you to save more than just them. What you do with this power will be your choice. But the path is no longer ordinary. The world beyond the plains has set its eyes upon you." The cowboy lifted his gaze, sweat glistening on his brow. And in that moment, the people saw not just a man of flesh, but a figure touched by something ancient, a protector marked by forces older than the prairie itself. Children peeked from behind hides, whispering that he was now more spirit than man. The chief's daughters clung to one another, eyes wide, not with fear but with awe, for the man who had saved them in the night now seemed like something lifted out of legend, larger than life, not just in size, but in destiny. The cowboy finally spoke, his voice hoarse but steady. "I didn't ask for this, but if it's mine to carry, then I'll carry it. Not for me, for them, for all of you." And as the wind swept through the camp, carrying his words into the open prairie, a sense of both hope and dread settled over everyone, for they knew this was only the beginning. And friend, if you've felt the pull of this mystery, the reward stranger than gold, the power hidden in the hands of a lone cowboy, make sure you subscribe now, because the next chapter will reveal what hunts him, what ancient shadow rises to claim what he now carries. And trust me, you won't want to miss the battle that follows.